The Story of the Revenge by Alfred H Miles. A report of the truth of the fight about the Isles of Azores, this last summer, betwixt the Revenge, one of her majesties ships, and an armada of the King of Spain, London 1591, bysirwalter Raleigh. Because the rumors are diversely spread, as well in England as in the Low Countries and elsewhere, of this late encounter between Her Majesty's ships and the Armada of Spain, and that the Spaniards, according to their usual manner, fill the world with their vainglorious vaunts, making great appearance of victories, when, on the contrary, themselves are most commonly and shamefully beaten and dishonored, thereby hoping to possess the ignorant multitude by anticipating and foreigning false reports. It is agreeable with all good reason for manifestation of the truth to overcome falsehood and untruth, that the beginning, continuance, and success of this late honorable encounter of Sir Richard Grenville and other Her Majesty's captains with the Armada of Spain, should be truly set down and published without partiality or false imagination. The Lord Thomas Howard, with 6 of Her Majesty's ships, 6 victuallers of London, the bark Rayleigh, and 2 or 3 pinnaces riding at anchor near unto Flores, one of the westerly islands of the Azores, the last of August in the afternoon, had intelligence by one Captain Middleton of the approach of the Spanish Armada, which Middleton, being in a very good sailor, had kept them company 3 days before, of good purpose both to discover their forces the more as also to give advice to my Lord Thomas of their approach. He had no sooner delivered the news, but the fleet was in sight. Many of our ships' companies were on shore in the island, some providing ballast for their ships, others filling of water and refreshing themselves from the land with such things as they could either for money or by force recover. By reason whereof our ships being all pestered and rummaging, everything out of order, very light for want of ballast, and that which was most to our disadvantage, the 1/2 part of the men of every ship sick and utterly unserviceable. For in the Revenge there were 90 diseased. In the Bonaventure, not so many in health as could handle her mainsail. For had not 20 men been taken out of a bark of Sir George Carey's, his being commanded to be sunk and those appointed to her, she had hardly ever recovered England. The rest for the most part were in little better state. The names of Her Majesty's ships were these as followeth: the Defiance, which was Admiral; the Revenge, Vice-Admiral; the Bonaventure, commanded by Captain Cross; the Lion, by George Fenner; the Foresight, by M. Thomas Vavassor; and the Crane, by Duffield. The Foresight and the Crane being but small ships, only the others were of the middle size. The rest, besides the bark Rayleigh, commanded by Captain Thynne, were victuallers and of small force or none. The Spanish fleet, having shrouded their approach by reason of the island, were now so soon at hand, as our ships had scarce time to weigh their anchors, but some of them were driven to let slip their cables and set sail. Sir Richard Grenville was the last weighed, to recover the men that were upon the island, which otherwise had been lost. The Lord Thomas with the rest very hardly recovered the wind, which Sir Richard Grenville, not being able to do, was persuaded by the master and others to cut his main sail and cast about, and to trust to the sailing of the ship, for the squadron of civil were on his weather bow. But Sir Richard utterly refused to turn from the enemy, alleging that he would rather choose to die than to dishonor himself, his country, and Her Majesty's ships, persuading his company that he would pass through the 2 squadrons in despite of them, and enforce those of civil to give him way, which he performed upon divers of the foremost, who, as the mariners term it, sprang their luff and fell under the lee of the Revenge. But the other course had been the better, and might right well have been answered in so great an impossibility of prevailing. Notwithstanding, out of the greatness of his mind he could not be persuaded. In the meanwhile, as he attended those which were nearest him, the great San Philip being in the wind of him, and, coming towards him, becalmed his sails in such sort as the ship could neither make way nor feel the helm. So huge and high-carged was the Spanish ship, being of 1,500 tons, who after laid the Revenge aboard. When he was thus bereft of his sails, the ships that were under his lee luffing up, also laid him aboard, of which the next was the Admiral of the Biscaynes, a very mighty and puissant ship commanded by Britandona. The said Philip carried 3 tire of ordnance on a side, and 11 pieces in every tire. She shot 8 forth right out of her chase, besides those of her stern ports. After the Revenge was entangled with this Philip, 4 other boarded her, 2 on her larboard and 2 on her starboard. The fight thus beginning at 3 of the clock in the afternoon, continued very terrible all that evening. But the great San Philip, having received the lower tire of the Revenge discharged with crossbar shot, shifted herself with all diligence from her sides, utterly misliking her first entertainment. Some say that the ship foundered, but we cannot report it for truth unless we were assured. The Spanish ships were filled with companies of soldiers, in some 200 besides the mariners, in some 5, in others 800. In ours there were none at all beside the mariners, but the servants of the commanders and some few voluntary gentlemen only. After many interchanged volleys of great ordnance and small shot, the Spaniards deliberated to enter the Revenge, and made divers attempts, hoping to force her by the multitudes of their armed soldiers and musketeers, but were still repulsed again and at all times beaten back into their own ships or into the seas. In the beginning of the fight, the George Noble of London, having received some shot through her by the armados, fell under the lee of the Revenge, and asked Sir Richard what he would command him, being but one of the victuallers and of small force. Sir Richard bid him save himself and leave him to his fortune. After the fight had thus without intermission continued while the day lasted, and some hours of the night, many of our men were slain and hurt, and one of the great galleons of the Armada and the admiral of the hulks both sunk, and in many other of the Spanish ships great slaughter was made. Some write that Sir Richard was very dangerously hurt almost in the beginning of the fight, and lay speechless for a time ere he recovered. But 2 of the Revenge's own company, brought home in a ship of lime from the islands, examined by some of the lords and others, affirmed that he was never so wounded as that he forsook the upper deck till an hour before midnight, and then being shot into the body with a musket as he was addressing, was again shot into the head, and with all his chirurgeon wounded to death. This agreeth also with an examination taken by Sir Francis Godolphin, of 4 other mariners of the same ship being returned, which examination the said Sir Francis sent unto Master William Killigrew, of Her Majesty's Privy Chamber. But to return to the fight, the Spanish ships which attempted to board the Revenge, as they were wounded and beaten off so always others came in their places, she having never less than 2 mighty galleons by her sides and aboard her. So that ere the morning, from 3 of the clock the day before, there had 15 several armados assailed her, and also ill approved their entertainment, as they were by the break of day far more willing to hearken to a composition, than hastily to make any more assaults or entries. But as the day increased so our men decreased, and as the light grew more and more by so much more grew our discomforts. For none appeared in sight but enemies, saving one small ship called the Pilgrim, commanded by Jacob Whiddon, who hovered all night to see the success. But in the morning, bearing with the Revenge, was hunted like a hare amongst many ravenous hounds, but escaped. All the powder of the Revenge to the last barrel was now spent, all her pikes broken, 40 of her best men slain, and the most part of the rest hurt. In the beginning of the fight she had but 100 free from sickness, and 80 sick, laid in hold upon the ballast. A small troop to man such a ship, and a weak garrison to resist so mighty an army. By those 100 all was sustained, the volleys, boardings, and enterings of 15 ships of war, besides those which beat her at large. On the contrary, the Spanish were always supplied with soldiers brought from every squadron, all manner of arms and powder at will. Unto ours there remained no comfort at all, no hope, no supply either of ships, men, or weapons. The masts all beaten overboard, all her tackle cut asunder, her upper work altogether rosed, and in effect even she was with the water, but the very foundation or bottom of a ship, nothing being left overhead either for flight or defense. Sir Richard, finding himself in this distress, and unable any longer to make resistance, having endured in this 15 hours, fight the assault of 15 several armados, all by turns aboard him, and by estimation 800 shot of great artillery, besides many assaults and entries, and that himself and the ship must needs be possessed by the enemy, who were now all cast in a ring round about him, the Revenge not able to move one way or other, but as she was moved with the waves and billows of the sea, commanded the master gunner, whom he knew to be a most resolute man, to split and sink the ship, that thereby nothing might remain of glory or victory to the Spaniards, seeing in so many hours fight, and with so great a navy they were not able to take her. Having had 15 hours' time, 15,000 men, and 53 sail of men of war to perform it withal, and persuaded the company, or as many as he could induce, to yield themselves unto God, and to the mercy of none else. But as they had, like valiant, resolute men, repulsed so many enemies, they should not now shorten the honor of their nation by prolonging their own lives for a few hours or a few days. The master gunner readily condescended and divers others, but the captain and the master were of another opinion, and besought Sir Richard to have care of them, alleging that the Spaniards would be as ready to entertain a composition as they were willing to offer the same, and that there being divers sufficient and valiant men yet living and whose wounds were not mortal, they might do their country and prince acceptable service hereafter, and that where Sir Richard had alleged that the Spaniards should never glory to have taken one ship of her Majesty's, seeing they had so long and so notably defended themselves, they answered that the ship had 6 foot water in hold, 3 shot under water which were so weakly stopped, as with the first working of the sea she must needs sink, and was besides so crushed and bruised as she could never be removed out of the place. And as the matter was thus in dispute, and Sir Richard refusing to hearken to any of those reasons, the master of the Revenge, while the captain won unto him all the greater party, was conveyed aboard the General Don Alfonso Basson, who, finding none overhasty to enter the Revenge again, doubting least Sir Richard would have blown them up and himself, and perceiving by the report of the master of the Revenge his dangerous disposition, yielded that all their lives should be saved, the company sent for England, and the better sort to pay such reasonable ransom as their estate would bear, and in the mean season to be free from galley and imprisonment. To this he so much the rather condescended as well as I have said, for fear of further loss and mischief to themselves, as also for the desire he had to recover Sir Richard Grenville, whom for his notable valor he seemed greatly to honor and admire. When this answer was returned, and that safety of life was promised, the common sort being now at the end of their peril, the most drew back from Sir Richard and the master gunner, being no hard matter to dissuade men from death to life. The master gunner, finding himself and Sir Richard thus prevented and mastered by the greater number, would have slain himself with a sword had he not been by force withheld, and locked in his cabin. Then the general sent many boats aboard the Revenge, and divers of our men, fearing Sir Richard's disposition, stole away aboard the General and other ships. Sir Richard, thus overmatched, was sent unto by Alfonso Basson to remove out of the Revenge, the ship being marvellous unsavory, filled with blood and bodies of dead and wounded men like a slaughter-house. Sir Richard answered that he might do with his body what he list, for he esteemed it not, and as he was carried out of the ship he swooned, and reviving again, desired the company to pray for him. The general used Sir Richard with all humanity, and left nothing unattempted that tended to his recovery, highly commending his valor and worthiness, and greatly bewailed the danger wherein he was, being unto them a rare spectacle, and a resolution seldom approved. To see one ship turn towards so many enemies, to endure the charge and boarding of so many huge armados, and to resist and repel the assaults and entries of so many soldiers, all which and more is confirmed by a Spanish captain of the same armada, and a present actor in the fight, who being severed from the rest in a storm, was by the Lion of London, a small ship, taken, and is now prisoner in London. The general commander of the Armada was Don Alfonso Basson, brother to the Marquess of Santa Cruz. The admiral of the Biscayne squadron was Briton Dona, of the squadron of Civil, Marks of Aremberch. The hulks and flyboats were commanded by Luis Cutino. There were slain and drowned in this fight well near 2,000 of the enemies and 2 especial commanders, Don Luis de St. John and Don George de Praneria de Malaga, as the Spanish captain confesseth, besides divers others of special account, whereof as yet report is not made. The admiral of the hulks and the Ascension of Civil were both sunk by the side of the Revenge. One other recovered the road of St. Nicholas and sunk also there. A fourth ran herself with the shore to save her men. Sir Richard died, as it is said, the 2nd or 3rd day aboard the General, and was by them greatly bewailed. What became of his body, whether it was buried in the sea or on the land, we know not. The comfort that remaineth to his friends is that he hath ended his life honorably in respect of the reputation won to his nation and country, and of the same to his posterity, and that being dead he hath not outlived his own honor. For the rest of her Majesty's ships that entered not so far into the fight as the Revenge, the reasons and causes were these. There were of them but 6 in all, whereof 2 but small ships. The Revenge engaged past recovery. The island of Flores was on the one side, 53 sail of the Spanish divided into squadrons, on the other, all as full filled with soldiers as they could contain. Almost the 1/2 of our men sick and not able to serve. The ships grown foul, unroomaged, and scarcely able to bear any sail for want of ballast, having been 6 months at the sea before. If all the rest had entered, all had been lost. For the very hugeness of the Spanish fleet, if no other violence had been offered, would have crushed them between them into shivers, of which the dishonor and loss to the Queen had been far greater than the spoil or harm that the enemy could any way have received. Notwithstanding, it is very true that the Lord Thomas would have entered between the squadrons, but the rest would not condescend, and the master of his own ship offered to leap into the sea rather than to conduct that her Majesty's ship, and the rest to be a prey to the enemy, where there was no hope, nor possibility either of defense or victory, which also, in my opinion, had ill-sorted or answered the discretion and trust of a general to commit himself and his charge to an assured destruction without any hope or any likelihood of prevailing, thereby to diminish the strength of Her Majesty's navy and to enrich the pride and glory of the enemy. The story of Sir Richard Grenville's last fight has been to many times in prose and verse. Sir Walter Raleigh tells it in the prose epic from which the foregoing is taken. Froude made it the subject of one of his essays. Gerald Massey and Lord Tennyson have both exploited it in ballads of power and beauty. These ballads are too long for quotation here, but there are some stanzas in Gerald Massey's poem which may be given. We will only add here that the Revenge foundered a few days after the fight with 200 Spaniards on board her, and conclude with Sir Richard Grenville's last words. Here die I, Richard Grenville, with a joyful and quiet mind, for that I have ended my life as a true soldier ought to do, fighting for his queen, religion, and honor, my soul willingly departing from this body, leaving behind the lasting fame of having behaved as any valiant soldier is in his duty bound to do. Ed.